Well, good afternoon. We often hear folks use the phrase when talking about someone who works at the church as having been called into ministry. But in actuality, I think we would all agree that every single person who is a follower of Christ is called to ministry. For we believe that Matthew 28:19 is for everyone. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What shape that takes and how it's played out in each of our lives is different. Some people feel called to be a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic, a lawyer, a homemaker, an engineer. Well, you get the point. Ministry can be a part of our work, no matter what our profession. But today I want to discuss being called to serve God by serving in the local church as a profession. Each one of us has had that calling in our lives. And some of your stories I've heard and others I haven't. But I think it's valuable for us to be reminded of our calling and to hear the stories of how God has revealed himself to each of us along the way. So our staff chat topic today is how and when did you feel God calling you to serve him through the local church? Are there people who helped you discern that call? Was it easy for you to make that decision, or did you struggle a little bit in the process? And maybe what gave you clarity? I can't wait to hear what everybody shares. Who wants to go first?
Jeannie, I'll go first. Most of you know that I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I grew up in a sort of a small church, but it was a terrific church. And in my teenage years and college years, we spent a lot of time studying the topic of how to find God's will for your life. And so from just a young teenage guy, I've always wanted to try to find out what God wanted me to do and what talents he's given me and what talents to develop. And so I grew up in a family with mom and dad and 4 boys, and we were a camping family. My dad was a fireman, which is great in that they didn't make tons of money, but they got tons of time off. And he would work a 24-hour shift, and then off a 24-hour shift, and work another one. And so that'd be 48 hours and 2 days. So he'd get 4 days off every week. And so he would bunch his vacation, and we'd go on these long 6-week vacation trips every summer, and we would take off to Yellowstone, and we would go down to the Grand Canyon, we'd go up to Maine, to Florida, we'd go all over the places every summer. And I felt very fortunate to be able to do that kind of stuff. Well, that gave me the desire to be a park ranger. I've always wanted to be a park ranger, just spending time out in the campgrounds with looking at the skies, taking us on nature trails. And I thought, man, that would be a great vocation to do. So went to Memphis State University and got my degree in park administration. And then I found out with just a regular degree, you get stuck at little parks like Fort Fisher or Shiloh National Park in around Memphis. And I wanted to be at a big park like Great Smoky Mountains or Yosemite or Yellowstone. So I went and got a master's degree at Memphis State. And then that's when, I don't know if you remember, when a lot of the people, the draft dodgers, were hiding out in national parks, and so they wouldn't allow any of us to do our internship in a national park. And so I tried to find an alternative place, and I went down to this big church in Memphis called Highland Heights Baptist Church. They had an activity center, and I met this guy named Jim Simpson, who was a minister of youth and recreation. The church I grew up in, we had a pastor. We had a volunteer youth minister, volunteer music guy, volunteer everything else. And so, but I met this guy who, for his job, he was doing a youth and recreation, had an activity center with a gym, and I was all into sports, and so I just loved doing that. And so it was almost like a snap of a finger. I saw that God had been preparing me to do what this guy was doing. And the craziest thing, this was in Memphis, Tennessee, and this guy, Jim Simpson, was Connie Warren Vigas, a summer intern back in Mount Olive, North Carolina, several years in the past. So it was, of course, I didn't know who Connie was then, but even if she existed, because I was in Memphis, Connie was still in Mount Olive somewhere. And so anyway, so I just looked at the way God was preparing me, and with park administration, he took these classes like leadership and facilities management and program planning and just all this stuff. It was just really what would be needed to be a great minister of youth and recreation. So then I went to Southwestern Seminary out in Fort Worth, Texas, and got another master's in youth ministry, and I already had a master's, so I got to not take a lot of the sort of general master stuff and got to take more specific things and sort of overload with youth ministry stuff. And the neat thing about Southwestern over some of the other seminaries is that it had like 6 or 8 different youth minister teachers. And they had this guy named Richard Ross who invented the True Love Waits deal. And they had just all these, really some of the best in the country. So I was really inspired by them. So, and that's in a nutshell is how God used a calling. He prepared me without me even knowing it. And so I answered his call and said, yes, I want to be a minister of youth and recreation. I had one interview. I went to after I fixed to graduate, we took this little seminar about how to get ready for a job. And so they told us how to answer questions and how to do that. So I went to my first interview, and this guy named Alan Lehman was there, and this guy named John Stike was there, and they asked me all these questions, and I had just taken this big program planning class that had a big notebook about 2 inches thick, full of ideas that I had of things you could do with a church recreation ministry, and they were real impressed with that, and I'd never done any of them, but it looked good. And so I even, at one point, I looked to this guy and said, well, what's your job at that church? He said, I'm the pastor. And I said, oh no, that was a good interview. I'll see y'all later. Well, I went back to my dorm room and got a call from Alan Lehman from the airport in Atlanta. They had flown back, and he said that I would love for you to fly to Wilmington and just see our church. And in my great wisdom, I said, yeah, my teacher said I need to go to as many interviews as I can just to get some experience. And he said, well, we don't really want you to get experience. We want you to come and be our minister of youth and recreation. And a sort of long story short, flew to Wilmington, saw the ocean, saw the water boats, and saw all that stuff, and saw the activity center, which was just a terrific facility. And actually for the next 42 years, I've been there doing stuff and have enjoyed fulfilling God's call for my life. And it's just given me, my heart's desire has been that, and I've been trying to do it and just loved every minute of it. So that's it, Jeannie. Thanks.
Wow, Don. Thank you so much. What enthusiasm. I love it. All right, who wants to go next?
I'll jump on with this one. So I was a college student. My intent was to go to law school, and I had this idea I was going to go to Wake Forest Law School. I was in school at UNC, now they call it UNC Pembroke. Back then it was Pembroke State University. I had begun dating a young lady who was in the 11th grade named Lisa Sanders. And I was going to church mostly because that's where Lisa Sanders went to church. I wasn't so committed or devoted to that. Decided that I really didn't I was taking these classes, getting ready for law school stuff, and I decided I really didn't like those classes. I was going, so what am I going to do? Well, I'm pretty good in math, so I switched to be a math major and did that, for a couple of semesters, and went, that's just really not that fulfilling for me, but I'm doing really well in these Bible classes. So I'll take these classes, and I felt God kind of calling me to the thing that I was doing best with in school. And I thought, well, what kind of future can I have here? I know I can be a professor. So I could teach religion somewhere. But in order to teach religion, you got to have a master's, probably a doctorate. So ended up majoring in religion at Pembroke State University. I entered Southeastern Seminary at Wake Forest, North Carolina, not at Wake Forest like the law school I was thinking I would attend. I remember my first night there at Wake Forest. I started seminary in January. So I got there, the dorm was empty, it was dirty, it was cold, it got dark early. I went to my orientation on Friday there at the seminary. Lisa was in school at Chapel Hill. I went to Chapel Hill for the weekend, and I said to Lisa, I'm not even going back over there. That is not the place for me. It's cold, it's dirty, I just don't have this good feeling about it. And Lisa said, you got to go back and give it a chance. I went back, hung out there at the seminary for a couple of years and felt like, okay, I'll be a campus minister, not professor, because I don't want to do the PhD stuff. I'll be a campus minister. And so just as Lisa and I were planning to get married, I had an opportunity to do an internship in campus ministry at Old Dominion University. We went there. I really enjoyed it. The folks were very complimentary about the ministry that I was about there. And I just knew I was going to have lots of opportunities to be a campus minister. And I began doing the interviewing, as Don was talking about. did several interviews, and the state directors of campus ministry, or Baptist student campus ministry, guy in Georgia thought that the lady in Mississippi was going to hire me. The lady in Mississippi thought the man in South Carolina was going to offer a job. The guy in South Carolina thought the guy in thought the guy in Alabama was offering a job, and Georgia was offering a job. I didn't realize there was a network, and all these folks had got together, and evidently they got their wires crossed, and there was no job offer. But my wife got offered a job at the state mental hospital in Morganton, North Carolina. So, baby, you got a job, and we got to eat. So we moved to Morganton. We got there. The Baptist Campus Ministry in North Carolina said I could work part-time if I would start a new campus ministry at a community college there. I started doing that. They told me there was no funding for it. I volunteered doing the campus ministry stuff, and the funding part came with my being a janitor. Got a job at working at a middle school right across the street from the Drexel First Baptist Church. And I had said in my prayer time with God, in the middle of seminary life, God, I know a lot of these people are going to be pastors. I will never work in a church. And a few months into picking up milk cartons and cleaning toilets and my life with middle schoolers, and it was right across the street from the Drexel First Baptist Church, standing on the front lawn of that school. I looked over and I could see that steeple, and I said, God, I don't know what you want me to do, but I don't believe it's this. Lisa and I went to Wednesday night supper at the Drexel First Baptist Church because Lisa worked with a guy that was one of the deacons at the Drexel First Baptist Church, and he invited her every week. You need to come to supper, Wednesday night supper with us. We went there. We met people. They said they had just on the Sunday night prior to agreed to start a new position called Minister of Education. And they wanted to know if I would be interested in talking to them. And I said, yes, sir. It took 6 months. You know, sometimes churches, it takes a while to work through the processes. And it took 6 months of now me praying, God, please give me the opportunity. If you'll just give me the opportunity, I don't know what you get in me, God, but I'll do the best I can. So a guy named Buddy Corbin was the pastor at Drexel First Baptist. He was one of those influences for me. So I worked there with him. And then my friendships with a guy named Bob Shepard and a guy named Fred Schussler. Bob was the pastor at Morganton, First Baptist Church in Morganton. Fred Schussler was the minister of education there. They encouraged me. They gave me opportunities. And Bob Shepard, who was a trustee at Wake Forest University, sitting beside of Mike Queen at a trustee meeting. And Mike, of course, was pastor at First Baptist Wilmington at the time. Mike had been in Wilmington for 4 years. And Mike was telling Bob, and we're asking how things going at church. Mike said, well, we're looking for a new minister of education. And Bob Shepard said, I think I know someone that would do really well working with you, knowing you like I do. Bob called me the next day and asked me if I would put together a resume, and he would like to pass it along to Mike Queen. And I did not know Mike Queen or anybody at Wilmington or anything like that. Bob Shepard loved me, cared for me. And interesting enough, when we first arrived in Morganton, Lisa and I went to the First Baptist Church there in Morganton, and I met Bob Shepard, and I asked him if I could come by and just kind of tell him some of my story, and I did. And in talking with Bob, he said, let me think about your gifts, and I'll see if there's someone that I know that could maybe help you. The next day he called me and he asked me, or he said, I think I have an opportunity. And he asked me if I had an aversion to cutting grass. And I said, no, I'm kind of being a janitor now. And he said, well, we need someone to cut the grass here at the First Baptist Church. If you would cut it every Friday, we'll pay you $50 a week. And I said, I will be there every Friday. Bob Shepard, who saw in me a capacity to cut grass and maybe a willingness to be, a servant, 6 years later said to me, I think there's a place for you, my brother. And I could not thank God enough for Bob Shepard, Buddy Corbin. God, some people talk about God opening doors. God had closed all the doors for me, the campus ministry and to other opportunities, in order to say to me, brother, you have some gifts that I can refine and I can use to further the kingdom, but you just have to submit. So That's kind of my story. Might be more than what folks wanted to hear, but that's kind of where I started, and where I am now.
Wow, Jim, thank you. I'd like to hear more of that story. All right, who wants to go next? Okay.
I could go.
Thank
Sorry. My story is a little different than a lot of others. I was in 8th grade, and I job shadowed my youth minister, and I got to go around. I called myself the executive assistant to the minister of youth and their families. And I was his executive assistant for the day during my 8th grade job shadowing day. And I remember, I don't know exactly everything that happened that day, but I remember after leaving that day that I think I want to do exactly what he did. His name is Todd Blake. Many of you may know him. He's a pastor in Virginia now. But I job shadowed him, and I said, I think I want to go to Campbell, major in religion, and then get my master's of divinity, and I'm going to go be a youth minister. That's exactly what I want to do. And I talked to Ron Cava, my pastor, about it at some point at the time, and kept going down this route all the way through middle school, but even into high school. Senior year of high school, I kind of danced around some other ideas. I was like, I can't make any money doing that. I don't want to go do that. I'm going to go into business, and then I'll do ministry on the side or something like that. Who knows? Well, lo and behold, it came time to pick a major in college, and I ended up picking religion for some odd reason after wrestling some other ideas. And I was getting close to graduation from college. I was like, I could go do business, and I'll do youth ministry on the side. I don't need to get a master's degree. Well, all my friends were like, we're going to go to divinity school. You got to go to divinity school. And I was like, well, where am I going to go? Well, Campbell's right here. So I just dual enrolled at Campbell and started actually working on my master's before I even finished my undergrad degree. And I did exactly what I said I was going to do when I was in 8th grade. I became a youth minister, and I went down that road, and I've thoroughly enjoyed working with teenagers. And I've been asked before, why youth ministry? And I've just felt this call on my life to do this thing. And some people attribute the quote to Martin Luther. Some people say he didn't say it, but whenever he was being interviewed or whatever about his writings that he had done, and they said, did you write these? Do you want to recant them? Do you want to renounce these writings? And he said, here I am, here I stand, I can do no other. That's kind of where I am with ministry. Here I am, here I stand, I can do no other. This is what I feel my life feels complete doing. It's good. It's kind of fun. I'm kind of like Don. I like to have a lot of fun. I like to goof off, and I get to work with folks that's their phase in life. They get to have fun. Teenagers are supposed to be teenagers, and I do enjoy this kind of ministry. I don't know what the future holds, but I thank God for giving me direction this far, and I really do enjoy what God has called me into. And I've had some good influences along the way, other ministers to students or people that were passionate about youth ministry. When I was in divinity school, Brian Foreman was another one of those who just really knows the field a lot, and good professors and other ministers that have let me bend their ear on how to do things well. And that's my story. It's kind of short, but there's more to it, and it's definitely stretched out, but that's where I've come from.
Wow, Gavin, thanks. We're so glad you're with us. You and Jim Baldwin just celebrated a year on staff, and we're just so glad to have you both. All right, anybody want to go next? Yeah, Stephen.
I can go. Yeah. So I've always said that I have two callings. My first calling was very obvious from a very early age, that I needed to do something music. And so growing up, I knew that I was going to end up being a choir director, and all through high school went down the route of preparing to be a choral educator. And so I went to ECU and did that whole thing with a choral education and the music school. And one of the perks of being a voice major there was that they would give gigs for singing in local choirs. So I always had a job when I was at ECU working in local churches singing for their choirs. And it was actually that's where I ended up feeling the call. And so First Presbyterian Greenville, their choral director resigned right around the same time that I was doing a little bit of practicum in some of the local schools. And I was really struggling in my classes. I was really struggling in the school. I was feeling very lost, and I loved music, but I knew that I did not want to go through what teachers go through. I was realizing that I was not made for that. It takes a very special person to be a teacher in a public school, and so the pastor actually called me of First Pres and said, "Hey, we just lost our music director. We need somebody to come in tomorrow night and do a choir rehearsal, and we need an anthem for Sunday." And so, it was I think it was a week before Ash Wednesday. And so I went in and did the choir rehearsal. I sight read the music as I was leading it, and prepared an Easter program and everything, and took on all of their ensembles. And, that really was kind of crazy, but a lot of fun. And my mother said at the time that, seeing how much energy I had around that I needed to go to Campbell, because we knew the director of choral activities. So I ended up transferring to Campbell, got a church music degree. Jim was talking about people that you meet along the way and you don't realize until later how important that is. Larry Dickens had conducted me in the Ulster Baptist Youth Choir about 7 years before. I had no idea that he was at Campbell University. That was not the reason why I went, but he found out that I was at Campbell singing in the undergrad program, and so he asked me to come and sing for the Divinity School Chapel on Tuesdays, because they needed somebody to come in and help out with their choir. And so really ever since I answered the call to go to Campbell, Larry has looked out for me, and it feels like God has just led me to opportunity after another. So after I graduated, Larry called up Matt Cook and told Matt that if they needed somebody to come in and be their interim music minister, then First Baptist could call me. Instead of calling any of those people with degrees in the divinity school, Larry, for some reason, recommended the guy that actually didn't even have a bachelor's degree at the time. And so it's just been amazing to see the opportunities that have opened up, and the opportunities that First Baptist has given me as well. So
I'm so impressed.
And amazing for us too, brother.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I feel like my calling is different. We all feel like our calling is different, don't we? I feel like mine comes out of something called holy discontent, which I didn't know that phrase back then. But, holy discontent, that moment when passion and purpose collide together. I was a stay-at-home mom. I had always struggled with what to decide to major in college, and thought it was accounting, got a job as an auditor, really didn't like that, that's a long story too. But I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was loving life doing that. Before that, I had a small business, and someone came along one day and said they wanted to buy my business, and we didn't get very much money, but it was enough to get out of debt and allow me to stay home with our son when he was born. And so immediately I started volunteering when we came to First Baptist with our youth ministry, and got to know Don. But then after I had our son and I was able to stay home, I got very involved with our children's ministry and felt like I couldn't get enough. Like I wanted to do everything there was with children's ministry, and did that for a couple of years. And most of you know, or some of you know, that we really wanted a second child, and that we just kept trying, and that was not happening. And so over a period of time, I guess about a year or so, I just started dropping off of everything. I stopped doing this and I stopped doing that, things with the church, and then just other things. I just sort of put life on hold, waiting for that to happen, just waiting for that to happen. And it just never happened. And one afternoon I was lying on the floor doing some exercises, and somebody had given me an article about secondary infertility. And I was reading that article, and I just lowered my head and started crying, and just felt this overwhelming grief. And I feel like the Lord said to me, put me first. Not put me first and you're going to have a child, but just put me first. And subsequently, I was doing a Bible study with my Sunday school class girls, and we were doing Henry Blackaby's Experiencing God. And just that week, I had heard the phrase, you know, that God is at work in our world, in our community, and in your church. And it's your job to figure out where he's working and to join him in that work. And so that experience of being on my knees and hearing God say, put me first, and hearing that about God is at work and I need to join him in his work, which just was really wrestling in me. Fast forward about 2 weeks, Mike Queen called, who was our pastor at the time, and asked if I would meet him at our activity center. And I said I would. I had no clue what he was calling about. I get to the activity center, and Jim, I can't remember if you were there, but I know Mike was there. I think you were there. And I sat across from the table from Mike and Jim, and they just said how they had been praying about who should lead our children in our next phase of trying to grow our children's ministry. And that they felt like the Lord had laid my name on their heart, and that was the direction. Wanted to know if I would consider that. And y'all know me, I started crying, you know, just immediately. You're not surprised. But it was such an overwhelming feeling of God pulling pieces together that I had no idea, that, you know, passion and purpose colliding. Went home really scared, not sure what that meant, but felt like that was what I was supposed to do. And it has been just the best thing in my life ever. I feel like God gave me the purpose, and he gave me the calling during that time frame. And, you know, I can remember Don showing me how to use simple programs that I had no idea how to even turn the computer on, you know, and Jane and John and Jan and Jim and Kurt and Mike, and how you just really surrounded me, and you supported me, and you let me dream and wrestle with things, and then trusted as we went out and tried new things to try to grow our family's ministries. And it was just such a blessing to be able to do that for 15 years. And then a couple of years ago, I felt this other nudging of something different, like to expand the things I had learned and make room for someone new to come along with better ideas and fresher ideas, and could really grow our ministry and children's families. And I just am so thankful that this is where God's put me to be, and I know that it's a calling. So.
Well, I didn't become a Christian until I was 16. And so when I went to college, I really didn't have any idea of where I was headed, what I was going to do. Enan and I had been dating since our junior year in high school, and we got married middle of our sophomore year. She transferred from UNC Greensboro to Charlotte. I was at Davidson, and it was getting about time, the middle of sophomore year, to declare a major and decide what to do. And so I started just thinking, okay, Lord, how can I make a difference in the world? What am I good at? What do I enjoy? And I really was enjoying the religion classes, but the most awful thing for me was to have to speak in front of people. In high school, when I had to give oral reports, it was just awful. I would stutter and stammer and get all red in the face. But anyway, by that time, Enan and I were attending a church not far from Davidson. And one Sunday night, I don't think the sermon was about a calling at all, but something spoke to both of us that night. And we came home and talked about what happened during that service. And we both felt called. Both felt called to pastoral ministry. And I remember laughing, thinking, God, you got a real good sense of humor, thinking I'm going to get up and speak in front of people. But he gave me a real love for doing that. And we have been partners in ministry for 45 years now, and served one particular church for 21 years, served a couple of others, and had just felt led to resign from a church when Matt Cook called and said, listen, our minister to senior adults is leaving. Would you be interested in that position? And when I resigned the other church, which I'd never done before, without having someplace to go, it's like God said, I'll let you know when the next thing comes up. And when I hung up talking to Matt, it's just like God said, okay, this is that next thing that I was talking about. And so really glad for the calling, and especially glad for this last calling to First Baptist Church. It's been good for us.
Go, Nick.
Thanks.
I grew up in a small Moravian church in the Bronx, and it was the kind of church where everybody did everything. You know, we had a pastor, but everybody else had to pitch in and do everything else, and I really love that. I've always been very comfortable and very drawn to the church and to ministry. When I was in college, my roommate was the campus minister for InterVarsity, and she was just had a whole different approach to ministry than I'd ever seen, and just somebody who kind of brought ministry even more alive to me. And it was the first time that I realized that God was calling me into ministry, and I did everything I could to not answer the phone. That was the last thing that I liked being a part of the church. I liked serving God, but I didn't want any part of that whatsoever. And so I had been planning for a career in foreign service, and one day had an encounter with a homeless man that sort of shifted that trajectory to homeless ministry. And Wes and I lived and worked with homeless folks in New York. And while we were there, I did just sort of take a peek at the Moravian Seminary and just see what that would be about. And, no, that's not going to be it. And then I went and I worked. I ran the homeless ministry for an Episcopal church in Manhattan for a little while. And so, the rector would say, you should think about going to divinity school. And I'd be like, no. And I'd take a peek at the Episcopal divinity school, and no, I don't want to do that. And so, we moved to North Carolina, and I was still in homeless ministry. And before that, I was in my very short tenure as a youth minister. I took a part-time gig at a Lutheran church here in town, and it only took me about 2 weeks to know that I was not called to be a youth minister, but I was there about 2.5 years. But so I found my way back to homeless ministry, and I worked at Good Shepherd House. And, I finally told God, I said, look, I will stick really close to the church. I will do good things, but we just need to let this ministry thing go, And I didn't wait around to really hear God's side of that conversation. I just pretty much, told God this is where I was. And so at Good Shepherd House, I met Jim Everett. And, when Wes and I moved to Wilmington, we were looking for a church. And, this is a long story that I won't get into, but our only criteria was that it not be a Baptist church. And so I told Jim, you seem really nice. I bet your church is great, but we're not going to be a part of a Baptist church. So long story short, we became part of the Baptist church, and we became part of First Baptist, and it's been, an amazing time. We were pregnant with our daughter Meredith at the time, who's the same age as Jeannie's son Cutter, and that was a wonderful experience. And but God would not let go of this whole calling piece. What I would say about calling that I've learned is God is persistent. I think I can, hold out a long time. God is persistent. And so, finally, when I had 3 children, I was 2 hours away from the nearest seminary, and in a denomination, not a church, but a denomination that wasn't really sure what it thought about women, I thought this must be the time to answer the call to go to seminary. And so I enrolled at Campbell Divinity School, and I said, God, I will do this, but you just need to know I'm not going into the local church. I'm not going into Christian education. I will go to seminary, and I don't know where it's going, but you just need to know that's not going to happen. And so, my calling story is don't ever tell God what you're not going to do. And don't try to reverse psychology God and tell him you won't go to the Caribbean. That doesn't work either. But God's call is persistent, and God's call, it has brought me a joy that I never imagined that and actually fought against in my life. And so, when God calls, pick up the phone, lean into that. He wants the best for you.
I love that.
Jane, that you and Jeannie started at the same time, 18, 19, 20 years ago?
19. We shared a desk and a computer.
Yeah.
There was a file cabinet on one side for me and one on Jane, and we picked the days we were going to come in and work. It was fun. All right. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. Well, I am similar to some of you in that I said I wasn't going to do this. My dad is a minister and my granddad is a minister, and I can distinctly remember sitting in the 7th grade cafeteria. I can picture the exact friends that were around me saying, I will never marry a minister. At the time, I wouldn't even have considered that I would have also been a minister. But I was very involved in high school in a student organization and had an incredibly influential teacher who invested a ton of time in helping me become a public speaker. And she just coached, and I wound up traveling all around the state my senior year of high school doing public speaking. And so as a part of that, I decided that's what I was going to do with my life, that I would follow in her footsteps, and I would be a family and consumer science teacher, and I would coach students and give them these incredible leadership opportunities as high school students. And so that's what I was going to do. And then I was also going to do that for a few years and then run for state superintendent of schools so that I could implement family life education as a mandatory class for all graduation. So those were like my big ambitions. So I go to the University of Georgia and I start taking classes along those lines, and I'm taking child development and family life classes, parenting, all the things that I needed for my family and consumer sciences degree. And I also was super involved in the Baptist Student Union, and I just fell in love with the campus ministers there and with the ministry that I was able to lead there with college students. And so I started seeing that maybe I wasn't going to start teaching, but there was no way I was going into the ministry. And so I continued along with all of those teaching preparations, and I started visiting the Career Counseling Center like a lot, all the time. Like, I need to take another inventory or another test, or I need you to like tell me what it is that I need to do with my life, because I don't think it's this teaching thing, but no way is it ministry. And again, I knew it was ministry, but I wasn't saying yes. And so after my junior year, actually after my sophomore year, I took an internship as a summer youth ministry intern with middle schoolers. And I had the time of my life. I loved it. It was so much fun. And it was so many things I was familiar with from having been in church every minute of every day with my dad. And so I loved it. And I quit working in that church. It was just a summer gig. And like a month later, I told my campus minister, I said, something is really missing in my life. And I feel like I need to be serving in the local church. And so he said, hey, I just got this call about this youth minister job at this little bitty church out in the country. Are you interested? And I was like, I'm already involved in like 75 student organizations, and I'm taking, extra hours to graduate early and all this stuff, but sure, I'd love to take on a youth ministry job. So I did. And I would drive out to this little church in the country. And anyway, long story short, I was their student minister and had so many wonderful experiences there, but I was still not going into ministry. And that church did not affirm women in ministry, but I could be their youth person, I guess. So the next semester I did international missions. And while I was there, I was pretty certain I was going to be doing ministry probably abroad, because it was amazing and everything was wonderful and glorious when you were a missionary overseas. It was just this glorious life. And so I came home and told my parents I thought I was going to be going to seminary, and they were thrilled. They were very supportive. But I decided I must be going to be a missionary. And so the next semester I spent abroad again, student teaching, this time in South Africa. And while I was there, I was just absolutely affirmed I was going to be a foreign missionary. I just loved everything about the international cultures and all of that. So I came home and started seminary and met Andy Jones. And Andy was not going to be a foreign missionary. And so I didn't know what that meant. I'm like, well, I am. And so you better get ready to come live in a hut with me if we're going to be together or not. So then we broke up because we couldn't figure out either how we were going to have two ministers or how we were going to live, one of us in Africa and one somewhere else. So through that process, I said, all right, I can work in the local church, but I will never, ever be a children's minister, because that is acceptable for women. And so like, I don't want anybody telling me that's like the only thing I can do. And so I said, I'll never be a children's minister. So we were about to graduate. We decided got back together. We decided we could work this out. God was going to have us be married. We could find 2 jobs. And we started interviewing in Augusta, Georgia. And he interviewed first and had a job. And the church told me they would never hire me, that I didn't have a job there. They had nepotism policies. Go find a job. So I'm interviewing for youth ministry jobs, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, the associate pastor there says, I'd like to take you to lunch at the K&W cafeteria. And so we go and meet him there. And he says, we'd like to offer you to be our children's minister. And I said, no, thanks. I don't want to be a children's minister. And I appreciate that. He said, do you suppose maybe you could think about it for a night or two? Maybe get back to us in a day or so after you've had a little more time to think about this opportunity and the fact that you two could work together at the same church and both be doing what you're called to do. And so I was like, well, I'm not called to that. So we went home, and that night I started thinking about all the things that God had done through my whole life, all of the training in children's ministry, all the experience I'd had as a teenager, leading vacation Bible schools like all over. The things that I had done internationally were with children indirectly. And I had been teaching people about parenting and child development. All those traveling experiences were like to help people realize the value of child development and family life and all the things that I get to do in children's ministry. And so I went back to him and said, well, I don't really know if I'll be any good at this, but I'll say yes. And so we said yes, and we moved to Augusta. And within literally like 2 days of starting that job, I realized that I had found the perfect fit for all of my gifts and who I was and the things that really made me feel just fulfilled. And so it has been almost 15 years in children's ministry, and what a delight it has been.
And we are delighted that you are in Wilmington now.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you.
I'll go next. So I grew up in the church, sort of like Don. Was there every time the doors were open, just highly involved and active in the life of the church. But I did not make that typical 8-year-old or 12-year-old profession of faith. I waited a lot longer and actually got all the way to my junior year of high school before I truly felt that I needed to become a Christian, that God really wanted to speak to me and that I needed to meet him where he was in my life and for that to become real and personal. But at that exact same time that I became a Christian, I experienced a call to ministry. They both happened at the literal same time. So I don't really remember a time as a Christian of not feeling called into full-time vocational ministry. When I made that commitment to my church and told them that I knew that God was calling me to do this, of course, everybody assumed that I was the next Billy Graham and that I was going to be a great little preacher boy. And although my experience was that, all I knew that you could do in ministry was be a preacher or maybe a music director, I've always had this thought that I was not going to be the preacher. That was just something that is not going to happen to me. So after my junior year of high school, I went and visited an aunt of mine in Texas who was at this giant church, and they had a family life center. And oh my gosh, real world hits me, and I was so excited. So I went to Carson Newman College, and I was going to be the first graduate in their church recreation program. And I was so excited, and I just knew that was where I was going to be, and I was going to get to play games and shoot basketball and do fun things with people for the whole rest of my life and call it ministry and be really happy. And what actually happened next was, this is not funny to say, but I'll just say it. During my junior year, they changed the church rec major and decided that you had to take anatomy and physiology in order to graduate. And I wasn't doing that. And there's a reason I wasn't doing that, because I wouldn't have passed them. So I switched over at the last second to a religion major, still knowing that at some point in time I was going to go to seminary. So I graduated from Carson Newman. Lynn and I got married while we were both students at Carson Newman, so I had to wait a little bit for her to get out of school. Took a youth ministry job, and in that youth ministry job, I thought I was doing really, really well, only to find out that I got a pink slip, sort of with very limited notice. And that's when I decided, you know what? I want to be in the ministry, but I'm not going to work in a local church. It's just not going to happen. So when I went to Southwestern Seminary, I studied to be a Baptist Student Union director. That's really what I wanted to be. Got to work with W.F. Howard, who's sort of like the main person in campus ministry in the United States. He basically founded the BSU at Baylor. So it just was something that I really wanted to do, and I felt called and passionate. This is what I'm going to do, and it keeps me out of the church, and all this is great. And about the time I graduated, it was the time that the Southern Baptist Convention was going through its major problems. And probably the first things to go bye-bye was that none of the states were hiring campus ministers. They all, froze the positions and got out of it. And so I'm graduated and I don't have a place to go. So I started at a small little college, Limestone College in Gaffney, South Carolina. I was part-time campus minister and part-time student activities coordinator. And I did their intramural program and planned campus events and activities, and also worked with trying to do campus ministry the best that I could on their campus. And then all of a sudden, I get this phone call one day from a fella, and he said, I've been talking to some folks about our need for a youth minister, and two people I've talked to have mentioned you by name. So I'm calling you to say, come and interview. And I did not want to get out of campus ministry, but I went for that interview. Then I became a youth minister. Then I decided, I'm going to be a youth minister for all of my life. I'm going to do it till I'm 65 and just be happy. Switched churches and had about 15, 16 years of youth ministry under my belt. And my pastor came to me and he said, look, we've been struggling with the second pastor, with an education pastor, with someone that will help us with our Sunday school and our committees and work some administration a little bit. I noticed that your degree at Southwestern was in education, and do you think you could do this? Because we've just been having bad luck hiring this type of minister. You've been at the church long enough to where you're loved and you're respected, and we think you ought to make this move. And I didn't really want to. I'll be very honest about that. But I did. I took one for the team. Probably started out at 80% doing the work of education and 20% doing the work of administration. And by the time I left, those had probably flipped all the way around. I was probably 80% administration and 20% education. And then I'm having a conversation with Jack Causey in North Carolina, who just knows a lot of people and knows a lot of situations. And he heard about the opening in Wilmington, and he said, I'd like to send you a resume. How about making one? And so I did, and found myself here. And, I want to sort of point this out. I probably grew up a lot like Don. Go, 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 do. So I want y'all to picture this in regards to fighting God. Just imagine Don being your minister of administration. And I'm just going to leave it at that. When you say yes to God, you got to say yes all the way. And you can't always get what you want or what you dream or what you wish, but you do have to be available. And I found that God has been able to use, the gifts and talents that I've had in some very unique and wonderful ways. And, I look at it today and I wouldn't want to be anyplace else doing anything differently. I love First Baptist Church and I love the work of administration. So it's just a great gift that God gave to me, and that calling being flexible and how he works.
John, we love having you on staff. I can't even picture a day before you were even here, honestly. All right, who wants to go next?
Okay, I guess I'll go. I had the extreme privilege of growing up going to Johnson Ferry Baptist Church down in Marietta, Georgia. And when my family and I started going there, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. And if you're familiar with that church now, you know probably that it's a huge mega church. It has like 10,000 members probably. It's a large, prominent church. But when we started going there, that was not the case. We went there. My family decided to start going there when their membership was probably closer to about, I think, 500 or 600 people. And so we started going there, really fell in love with the church. I mean, I remember as a young child really just being super involved with all these different ministries at the church and really loving it. I became a believer younger than that at a different church, but this going to Johnson Ferry was integral in helping me really understand what I believed through going through courses like, Bible drill, memorizing scripture in that way, being really involved in children's choir. They had a budding children's choir program that now is kind of a model for a lot of children's choirs all around the country. And then eventually wound up doing student choir with them and all these different things, and serving on their production teams, helping operate cameras, helping, move what was then Media Shout, which is an old software that used to put things on screens, running audio, whatever it may be. I really had a huge opportunity in that I was able to grow up as those things were kind of being implemented in this church. And so that really has given me a solid foundation for what I do now. But my call to the ministry happened distinctively when I was 15 years old. I was in a worship service, an evening worship service being led by, at the time, the student youth band, and was there worshiping. This was one night where I wasn't running audio or running slides or anything. I just could be in the congregation worshiping in. And the Spirit of the Lord came on me, and I had a vision where God told me, I will use you to change a generation. And I saw the Spirit of the Lord descending on what looked like a crowd, but it wasn't descending on everybody. It was just descending on a few people. And God told me, this is my generation, and I want you to shepherd this generation. And I came out of that vision, and that has been my life ever since. That's what I wanted to do. People who have kind of these miraculous calls to the ministry, some people say, oh, well, that's so cool. That you're called to the ministry. But the reality is, for me, I still didn't know in that moment. I still was like, what just happened to me? It was very kind of weird. And I remember going to a Chinese restaurant that we used to go to a lot. And I told my mom, I think I feel called to the ministry. And she was like, well, that's awesome. She grew up as a pastor's kid. My grandfather was a Southern Baptist preacher his entire life. And so she's like, you know what you need to do? You need to call your granddad. So we got home, I called granddaddy, and he had some good advice for me. He said, well, that certainly does sound like a call to the ministry, which, looking back on it now, duh. But he said, there's really one way that you can tell for sure. And I said, okay, what is that? And he said, I want you to spend some time imagining doing anything else with your life. Anything. And if you can do anything else with your life and feel like it's serving God, do that instead. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And, I came back to him after a few weeks and I said, that's really weird. I don't think I can imagine myself doing anything and serving God in the same way. And he said, well, good. You need that kind of confidence, because here's what he told me. I'll never forget this. He said, this is a job that is extremely difficult if you're doing it correctly. You're going to make enemies with people. They're not going to like what you have to tell them sometimes. And you need this drive that's not from yourself, but it's given by the Lord in order to effectively do this work. And that's why you needed to think about, can you do anything else? Because this is I remember him describing it then. He said, this is often a thankless job, but it is so rewarding. And so from that point forward, I have set the course of my life. God has rather, set the course of my life on doing that mission, shepherding his church in any way that I can. I didn't always know I was going to do music ministry. At the time, I had, my whole family was pretty musical, and I, had been doing trumpet actually, which was kind of my primary instrument at the time. So when I started looking at colleges, I really just approached it through the mindset of, okay, God, I feel called to the ministry. I don't know what that looks like or what type of ministry, but I trust that you know what's best for me. And so I need you to just open a door and I'll walk through it. And sure enough, he did. Through a voice scholarship to Carson Newman. Turns out John Daniels and I actually went to the same school. And so I pursued a voice performance degree there. And toward the end of that, started thinking about, okay, do I need to go to seminary now? I was praying through those things and started looking at a bunch of different degrees, a bunch of different places, mostly in church music, some MDiv. And during college, I had met Muriel. And one thing was extremely clear, which was she still has 3 years of college left, and I need to stick around for that. So I decided, okay, you know what? I'm just going to stay at Carson Newman and get my master's in theology here. And that's what I did. And it wound up being the perfect fit for me, and really just kind of set my life on a great course. I mean, that's how I wound up at First Wilmington. One of my professors there was a consultant with First Wilmington. And when you guys were looking for a modern worship pastor, and he shot me an email and said, I'm working with this church. I think you'd be a really great fit. At the time, I had been working at several other churches, but really felt like it was time to go. And so I said, sure, why not? Throw my name in the pot. And here I am. It's been a good journey, and we love First Baptist Wilmington.
John, I love hearing your story. I've heard bits and pieces of it along the way, but never in a whole like that. And so great. I agree with you. I think sometimes when when I heard that, felt like the Lord said to me, put me first. I really questioned for a couple of days, because I only had about 2 weeks before everything started happening. Was that the Lord, or is that just me in my head? And little by little, those affirmations just keep coming along. Y'all, I've loved this time together today for our staff chat, and I know that you would agree with me that if you are watching this and you feel like God has been speaking to you or nudging your heart, any of us would love to have a conversation with you and help you discern that and help you pray through that and just pray for you. I really pray that you will reach out to us and let us be that support system for you. We can continue these conversations later individually. If you want to do that, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. And everybody say bye. We'll see you at the next staff chat, everybody.